I got a new book for inspiration. It's this really cool bestiary of Dungeons and Dragons creatures drawn in these really stylized way. It's super cool. I'll link places that other people can buy this if they want, as well as one of the artist's Instagrams. Lots of awesome stuff there. Make sure to go check it out, linked in the description and stuff. But the point is, reason I'm bringing it up today is because I want to turn some stuff from this book into superheroes. I'm gonna randomly flip through this book, pick out some really cool creatures, and use those to inspire some superheroes that I'm designing in today's episode. And the reason I'm gonna randomly select some creatures is because, well, let's face it, this being me, if I was picking the mythical creatures myself, we would probably just get a lot of, oh, I am definitely using this dragon. Oh, and this dragon. Oh, that one's so cool. Oh, look, another. So, yeah, gonna randomly pick some. Also, I've been wanting to practice some stuff with how I draw female characters lately, so I think I'm gonna stick with female superheroes for this episode. That'll hopefully add a little bit of extra flavor to this video, somehow, maybe? I don't know, we'll see. Originally today, I was actually gonna finally be putting out Biomech Kayla, the original short story that I teased in my Biomech Avatar episode, but the Avengers and Other Video Games video that I put out on Friday took longer than expected, and I didn't want to rush through Biomech Kayla, so doing this instead, but I think it's gonna work out. But you can all hold me to this. If I don't put out Biomech Kayla a week from today, you can all come to my apartment and throw rocks at me. And if you like the idea of people coming to my house and throwing rocks at me, actually wait, most people who hit the like button are probably people that wouldn't want that, so if you don't like the idea of people throwing rocks at me, hit the like button. Or even if you do, just everybody hit the like button before we get started. It helps with algorithm stuff. Is that done? We all good? Alright, then let's randomly flip through this book and see what creature we're starting with. Shea Stone had always loved the outdoors. Every chance she got, she'd go out on hikes or dives or biking, but most of all, she loved climbing mountains. With a rope, without a rope, it didn't matter to her. She'd always felt so completely connected to the mountains whenever she climbed. By her early 20s, she was a tank of a woman and spent most of her time exploring unclimbed mountains and taking nature photographs to help fund her active lifestyle. One day, she was climbing a largely unexplored mountain in Greece when she came across a slight crack in the wall, just barely big enough for her to fit through. She shuffled her way in and found it opened into this massive cave. In the very center was an amulet, but it was surrounded by skeletons. Every bit of sense she had was telling her not to touch it, but she couldn't help herself. She put her hand on it and immediately the room around her started to quake. At first, she felt pain, but soon, as if the amulet had accepted her, a wave of energizing strength shot through her body. The entire cave collapsed around her, but to her shock, she wasn't crushed. Shea found she could move through the rocks as if swimming through thick water. She emerged out a sheer cliff and fell nearly 200 feet down. But instead of splatting against the ground, she landed, shaking the earth, creating a crater and remaining completely unharmed. Her whole body was now coated in shifting rocky plates. Her hair had become like a cloud of sand, and eventually moss would even start to grow on parts of her body. From then on, Shea became the most famous explorer on the planet, able to swim through the earth to find caves and ruins either long forgotten or never seen by human eyes. And while that would take up most of her time, she'd also use her incredible strength and invulnerability that came with her earthly powers to help fight poachers, deforestation, and any other crimes against the earth that she now felt even more connected to than ever. Now, one other thing that I really wanted to do with this video, as I said, I'm doing a bit of experimenting with how I draw female characters, is I want to mess around with the proportions. I find with characters in general, I have some go-to body shapes that I frequently use, but I find even more so with female characters, I have one generic body type that I often go with, and I don't want to get stuck into that. So in this episode, every character, I'm going to try to do a different body type. This one's obviously the big, bulking kind of character. I was referencing Zarya from Overwatch for it a bit, but obviously this character is even bigger than that because she was already a pretty muscular character before getting her powers, and then she got rocky plates coating all over that muscular body, so she's that much bigger. While making this character, I was also actively trying to make sure she wasn't similar to Alexis Jones, my original character from Multiverse Tales, who also has rock-based powers, but hers is more of a mineral magnetism kind of thing. I thought it was really cool. I didn't know that Earth Elementals had the ability to swim through rocks and through the earth. That was explained in the Dungeons & Drawings book, and I thought that was really great, so I had to add it into this. Overall, I'm super pleased with this one. The proportions are really cool and different enough from what I usually do for female characters. So I hope y'all like it as well. Here is Shea Stone. Belle Bastile's life was never easy. Right from birth, it was clear she was very different. She was born with green and purple skin, and her eyes were snake-like yellow and red. Her father couldn't stand the sight of her, and when her mother refused to give up the daughter, he left. But her mother always loved her and even named her Belle as a way to show her that even with her differences, her mother thought she was beautiful. But Belle's abnormalities didn't stop. As she grew to over 7 feet tall, she found her skin was incredibly dense and thick like scales, and she could secrete a pink goop that was incredibly poisonous to anyone who touched it. Finally, she found that if she stared at someone unblinking and focused hard enough, they would become paralyzed for up to an hour. All this meant Belle was an outcast her whole life. Even with her mother's love, she struggled to have many periods of happiness. That is, until one faithful night into her early adulthood. You see, out walking one night, she came across a woman being shaken down by some muggers in an alleyway. She intervened, and the combination of her appearance, her stature, and her dripping venom from her hands as she approached terrified the muggers, and they fled. The woman she saved was clearly also quite intimidated, but she emphatically thanked Belle. And in that moment, Belle felt a sense of purpose. For once, it seemed like the things she'd felt cursed with her whole life had some kind of positive purpose. She began going out at night to the most dangerous neighborhoods in her city, looking for more people to protect. She would often scare off criminals without even having to fight. But in the rare case where someone did try to attack her, she would paralyze them, then get right up close to their face and ooze venom in front of them as an extra show of intimidation. She was still scaring people, to be fair, as she had her whole life, but now she was actually enjoying it. After weeks of this, she told her mother what she was doing, and her mother initially hated it. She'd spent her whole life hoping people would stop fearing her daughter. But when she saw how much purpose and joy it brought to Belle, her mother accepted it and even started helping her. She made her a Kevlar suit for some extra protection, and they even developed an antidote for her venom that she could carry around in case she infected an innocent civilian. From then on, Belle would have a true sense of purpose and self-worth. And while many would try to stop her over her vigilante career, she would quickly become known by all in the city as a lurking savior of the innocent. Now with this design, hopefully it's clear by now that I'm going for a very thin, lean, almost gangly kind of character. As I said, this character is over 7 feet tall, and the character also very clearly has really big hands and feet, and that's something I do a lot, but it's even more emphasized here because the character's got really skinny arms and legs, and I'm really liking how this one comes together. I also like the idea of doing someone who is a little bit more anti-hero feeling. I mean, she would clearly come across to other criminals and people in the city as a bit of an anti-hero, but really she isn't actually attacking people that often. She rarely has to even fight anyone, as I said in the story, and I thought that was kind of a fun play on this version of a Basilisk. Also, when I think of a basilisk, I tend to think of something that's more of a combination between a chicken and a snake, but I really like this stylized rendering of a basilisk, and obviously I've seen lots of different variations on it. They're mythological creatures, so really people can design them however they want them to look. It was super fun to play with, and I hope you all like the final version of our basilisk hero. You know, it's been a little while since I stopped the video halfway through to suggest that people subscribe and ring the bell to get notified so that they can see videos right when they come out on Fridays and Mondays. Yeah, been a while. Anyway, let's jump back into the story and artwork, shall we? Unless an ad plays, then you'll have to watch an ad first, but if not, story time. Every generation, a new mortal inherits the powers of the great mythical phoenix. The user gains the ability to fly, near invulnerability, and the ability to superheat their skin, enough to melt through steel. When the phoenix host dies, the power is transitioned into a new host, but so is the consciousness of the previous phoenix, so the new user has a mentor who can teach them the ways of the phoenix power. Archibald Pyrex was last generation's phoenix, and when he died, the power and his mind were placed in Penny Robbins. Now, Archibald had been the heir to a vast family fortune, raised as an eloquent sophisticate. When he wasn't superheroing, he was teaching fencing at a private school or attending meetings as the inherited owner of the family business. The phoenix before him, who trained him, had been similar. Penny's life was far from similar to Archibald's. Her family wasn't poor, but certainly wasn't rich. She was a high school senior rugby player and had an attitude to match. She was excitable and boisterous and highly competitive. Archibald couldn't stand her as he started teaching her the ways of the Phoenix and didn't understand how someone like her had been chosen. But over time, she would prove to be one of the greatest owners of the Phoenix powers yet. Her competitive drive pushed her to train with these powers extensively and get a handle on them far quicker than most. Her outgoing personality also made her far more likable to the people she saved. Archibald would slowly come to respect her and see how someone from a less opulent lifestyle could actually be a superior host for this ancient power. Now, when I think of a phoenix and look at the reference images for a phoenix, the body type I think of is much more similar to what I did with the last character, but the idea of the phoenix regenerating and the power transitioning into someone else gave me the idea that I could draw a character that doesn't have a body type that matches my stereotypical idea of what a phoenix personified would look like. And obviously I didn't want this character to look too much like the X-Men character Phoenix, because, you know, that already exists. I want to differ this up a bunch. So the idea of this power going to someone who doesn't look or act like a stereotypical phoenix ended up working well both for the design, I think, and for the story, of course. It just, that made for a fun dynamic that I think would have been interesting to flesh out into a longer story, but that's obviously not the point of this video. So the body type for this one is a character that's a little bit more on the chubby-ish side, a little bit more pear-shaped. I was looking at some reference images of rugby players, and some of them do have some of them have a bit of a She-Hulk kind of look, like super muscular, but some of them are a bit more short and squat, and they're like bulky in a way that looks like you would have a really hard time knocking them over, which is obviously a very fitting body type for a rugby player. You don't want to get knocked over. So this is probably the design I actually had the most fun with. With the inking, I did things really simply, but then afterwards in the coloring stage, I added some cool energy lines throughout the suit, almost as if this is like a Green Lantern kind of suit that she can generate on herself whenever she wants. I had also thought about giving the character actual wings, but as I was, puttering around with that idea in my mind, I was like, you know what, this will be a little bit more interesting if I try giving the character some energy wings. That was definitely fun. I'm glad I went with that. I also play around with some more anime-style eyes in this, and I think they work out really nicely. But you can all let me know what you think. Here is our Phoenix superhero. Lana Chen had always been incredibly observant, but it wasn't obvious that this was because of an inherent ability she had until later in life. She'd been born mute as well as born with an odd protrusion from her forehead, but aside from that, she lived a relatively normal life. In middle school, she'd often walk from school to the courthouse to meet her father. He was an incredible lawyer, and Lana had always been fascinated by his work. She'd sit in on trials, quietly observing not just the words, but the body language of everyone involved in the proceedings. And after having sat in on many proceedings herself, Lana found she could always tell who was guilty or innocent, long before the case was close to an end. It almost seemed like she could see the guilt oozing from the perpetrators. But one day, she deemed early on that a man accused of killing a shopkeeper was guilty, but the jury proclaimed him to be innocent. Lana was furious. She didn't know how, but she knew for a fact that he was guilty. The anger of this false verdict ignited something in Lana, and suddenly, in the middle of the courtroom, her hair burst into a flaming trail of light. She jumped from her seat, and with bounds so light it seemed as if she were flying, she leapt across the room to right in front of the man. People all around were confused and screaming, but she remained calm and stared at the killer. She raised a finger, flames sparking from it as well, and pointed at the man. After a moment of confusion and terror, the man out of nowhere confessed to the crime. As he did, her hair returned to normal. Soon after this, the city would bring Lana on as a new kind of investigator and consultant. Her sense of unjust, which could activate her powers at any time, would be a huge asset in both finding and prosecuting criminals. She'd be used both in courtrooms and out on the street, finding criminals to arrest. When in full power, Lana found her body could move at superhuman speeds, and she could leap as though in low gravity. She also had superhuman strength, which made it easy for her to apprehend criminals. And while proof would always be required to make a proper criminal charge, Lana would become an invaluable asset in the enacting of justice. Now, funny enough, with this character, I end up going with my usual stereotypical body type for a female character, and I think this design ends up being the most boring one, which I guess makes sense. The other ones, I'm changing things up a lot more, doing not new things, but something that I'm not usually doing, and I found them more interesting. But one thing I did really like about drawing this character was getting to take inspiration from a creature that I knew very little about. The Qilin, I think, is how it's supposed to be pronounced. I looked it up, but I'm not totally sure. I could be wrong. It's a Chinese character that, in the Dungeons and Drawings book, it talked about how these creatures have been used in courtrooms to point out someone who is guilty or not. They can't speak, but they can just point their horn at someone and go, let people know that's the guilty party. So I thought that would be a fun thing to work into this character's backstory. It made it really easy coming up with a story for this character. If you don't know much about those creatures, make sure to check out this book or just look up Qilins, Qilin. Hope you like how this one turned out. Here's our last hero of the day. Take a look. Well, that's all she wrote for today. I think there's definitely more experimenting that I should be doing with different body types for both female and male characters, but this was definitely a good jumping off point and has got my head swirling a little bit more with different ideas for proportions and things like that. Anyway, if you did like this book, again, make sure to check it out. Links to a bunch of different places you can buy it and check out the artist's work in the description. Thank you to Blanca Martinez de Ricciuerto and Joe Sparrow for making it, because it's really awesome. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. But yeah, Dungeons and Drawings. I'm probably going to use it a few more times because this was a lot of fun. And of course, if you're new to the channel and like stuff like this, I've got lots of turning things into superheroes videos. I've done Godzilla characters, I've got a whole series of turning Pokemon into superheroes, and I've got lots of stuff going the other way, turning superheroes into things like dragons and mythical creatures. But anyway, everybody, that's all for today. I'm Christian Pearson. This has been PopCross Studios, home of the nerdiest art videos on YouTube. Thanks so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next one. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, and hold me to putting out Biomet Kalo a week from today. Remember, rocks. If I don't put it out, rocks. Anyway, bye.